Coming up, we turn our attention to the Week 2 matchup with the Arizona Cardinals. Where can the New York Football Giants have success? What can we learn from the battle against the Commanders that maybe Arizona presents some problems? And who I say, will be starting at left tackle? We break it all down coming up next. Yes, my friends. It is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets and the Locked On Nets podcast, and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast, joined as always by the healthy, the wealthy, and wise, the seasoned generational ticket holder, Mr. Andrew Mackwitz.
How we doing, Adam? Are we ready to turn the tape? Are we ready to bury the tape, turn over a new leaf, whatever the pun is, from what happened on Sunday night and start focusing forward? Or do you still have any last words about the debacle that we saw on Sunday night?
I'm only going to reference it in terms of areas that we want to see the Giants have success and how some things in that game can inform the Week 2 matchup with the Cardinals. But no, please, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, what good does it do to dwell on the past, even if that past is just one of the most disturbing things you've ever witnessed as a Giants fan? No, we turn our attention to the Arizona Cardinals, to the Week 2 matchup on the road. The Giants, by the way, are going to stay out west after this game because the way you want to do it after a bad start to a season is play a bad team like Arizona, but then play the San Francisco 49ers on the road. So they're going to stay on a short week on a Thursday. So obviously that'll be something to keep in mind next week. But as we dive in on the Cardinals conversation, we start with the injury updates, obviously. We'll get to Andrew Thomas first and foremost, but just a quick note that was put out here by Dan Duggan a little bit earlier today. We're recording on a Wednesday afternoon. Scary scene at Giants practice where Amani Oruwariye was loaded onto a backboard and carted off the field. Medical staff was very careful moving him, did see him moving his left hand, and as he was carted off, didn't see what happened. They were doing kickoff drills. So another just unfortunate, not only from a depth perspective, but just any player that's getting injured like that. But it comes in the secondary where Cordell Flott did not play in Week 1 and where we have real questions just across the entire team in terms of depth. Another scary situation for the Giants at practice.
Yeah, as you mentioned, scary situation. You really hope that Armani's okay. Obviously, was a big part of training camp. Thought that he was going to be a guy that was going to get some significant reps for the Giants.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're still figuring out what they want their secondary to look like. Scary scene. You just hope that he's better. You hope that it's not anything serious. Hearing that there's some range of motion in the arms is helpful. So we wish him a speedy recovery. Hopefully, before game time on Sunday. Hopefully, in the next couple of days, we'll get a little bit more insight onto what the actual injury was. But fingers crossed, everything's okay.
And then you get into Andrew Thomas, obviously, with his MRI. It looks like he's day-to-day. Now, day-to-day doesn't mean day-to-day and then day-by-day. He'll be out there on Sunday for sure. But at least the least concerning of the feedback there, maybe he's going to kind of nurse himself through a little bit of this. They dodged that bullet, but that's where we're going to start, though. We talk about offense and obviously defensive depth coming into this game. The question that we'll ask the public, we want to hear back from you before Sunday. Who should start at left tackle for the New York Football Giants? You posed the question the way you had it framed, Andy, because it was a good way, I think, to think about it. Injury and talent all being accounted for here.
Yeah, so obviously with Andrew Thomas hurting his hamstring on a special teams play, trying to make extra effort. Pat Leonard put out on Twitter that the doctors told Andrew Thomas it's nothing serious, but it's going to be all about how he feels, manageable based on the position he plays. But it's also 2 games in a short week span, so they're kind of saying like, you might be able to go. It's all going to be on how you feel. We don't really know what we're going to see. He's not a wide receiver who's got to be full sprinting down the field, so they kind of are taking it with a grain of salt. But
you do what you want to do.
Yeah, it's like okay, totally know you're hurt, but like only you can tell us whether or not you're going to get injured again, Andrew. Right?
Only you would know, and only you will ultimately be responsible for whatever happens to you out there, pal. God bless.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how they're describing it because Andrew Thomas did go back in the game after having the injury. He was laboring a little bit, hobbling, but still played probably as one of the best offensive linemen out there, which isn't saying much. But the Giants have an interesting conundrum going on, Adam, where you have Andrew Thomas, who's your, Pro Bowl level, all world left tackle who you just gave a boatload of money to be there for a long time. He is your best offensive lineman, and now he is dinged up. You're going in against the Cardinals pass rush that got 6 sacks, a whole host of other things, 2 fumble recoveries, a touchdown against the Arizona Cardinals defense. They're no slouch. And really, the options are Andrew Thomas hobbled, Joshua Ezeudu, who played both left tackle and right tackle at University of North Carolina, or swing tackle Matt Pert, who we've seen, has some limited reps, was injured, but was out there actually practicing today as well. Those feel like the only 3 options for going into Sunday. Do you have an inclination either way on what the Giants should do?
Well, oftentimes, Andrew, when we talk in the offseason about contracts, et cetera, you tell me to follow the money. I'm going to follow the week 2 depth chart, which has Matt Pert listed behind Evan Neal and behind Andrew Thomas as the swing tackle, has Shane Lemieux listed as the depth behind left guard and behind center, and Joshua Ezeudu is only listed at right guard in terms of depth. And, we'll talk a little bit about Glowinski, who, as you can tell, remains atop the depth chart at the right guard position. So I'm just going to assume that I'm assuming that it would be Matt Pert if Thomas can't go. And I don't think I have a different preference there. Like, if it was me, I don't know if Ezeudu, who was the one that gave up the field goal block, so that's playing kind of out on the edge of a line. I wasn't blown away by his technique. And then you could even maybe throw it all the way down to a Marcus McCathan, who the organization says they're high on. They worked him out at tackle over the course of camp too, but you haven't even seen him come up on a depth chart. So for lack of a better option, it's going to be, if not Andrew Thomas, Matt Pert starting probably at left tackle.
It's a scary proposition. Adam, those games like Let's Make a Deal, and it's like you have something in your hand, which is, Andrew Thomas could hurt himself further, completely derail his entire season for the Giants if he were to, really have a bad hamstring pull. But you have this known commodity in Matt Pert right now as door number 2. Door number 3 could almost be anything. There could literally be a goat behind the door, right? You don't even know what it could be. And yet I think all Giant fans are thinking, let's kind of see what is behind door number 3, because that actually might be our best option right now. And I think a lot of Giant fans are thinking the same thing. We've seen Matt Pert over the last few years in spot starts. He has not looked good. He has not looked good when injuries have come over any of our tackles and he's had to fill in. Are you almost kind of thinking, well, if Andrew Thomas can't go, should we just see what Ezeudu has? Because we already know what Pert brings, and it's not something that we really like.
Well, and in that vein, yes, the simple fact, remember, Matt Pert is a holdover from the previous regime. Joshua Ezeudu is a 3rd-round pick for this regime. So at some point, you have to say that he's deserving of an opportunity. The fact that with how badly we saw Glowinski play in week number 1, you're almost disappointed that over the course of camp, he didn't claim that starting role from him in the first place. So yeah, I want to get whatever guys you think are going to be the future here. And we'll talk about it a little later in the episode in terms of, as we mentioned last episode, the perception was the fan base looking for. At some point, we can't sit here and be hedging ourselves about, well, we don't want to risk and the long-term development of. We're in the development. This is the development. If you don't have a better option, and if you haven't gone out and made it so that those players don't need to be called upon, if you don't think that they're actually ready, hopefully we get cautiously optimistic, and Ezeudu does end up playing, if not Andrew Thomas, and we get ourselves a nice little sample size that says, okay, he's going to take his lumps, but at least we know we're adding then a 4th young offensive lineman to the rotation that we need to see develop and grow, even if we know what's growing right now is the concerns around Evan Neal and his play.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think, after the dust settled, we know that Evan Neal did not play well at all on Sunday night. I'm kind of more okay with giving him more time to mature because we did invest such a high pick. He did come from such a high pedigree at Alabama. Like you feel like there still is something there that can be developed. Whereas you look at something like Glowinski, it's like he's been in the league. He was supported by having guys like Quentin Nelson working alongside him on the offensive line of the Colts. It just feels like with Evan Neal, I'm willing to give a little bit more time to.
Of
But
course.
some of these other positions, it's about time to make some changes. Like I get wanting to have some consistency with Glowinski going into the Arizona Cardinals game on Sunday, but I just feel like, I don't want to get to the point where it's like year 4 of one of these people that they've drafted. They're like, Well, he hasn't played that many games, so we still don't know what we're getting from him yet. And it's like, well, these are the opportunities for these players to get some reps so that we know how they're coming along. If we don't do any of that in the process, then in year 4, it's still a big question mark of like, what if they got on the field? Like, we need to know now.
Hey, top 5 players, and I agree with you, coming out of that week 1 game by PFF standards. Take it for whatever you want. Joshua Zudu led all players on the offensive side of the ball at 75.8. Gary Brightwell, 69.2. Saquon Barkley, 68.5. Darren Waller with those big 3 catches, 64. And Andrew Thomas, 62.1. Obviously, snap counts play a big role when we talk about that. And if you want to keep going down the ugly side of it, Daniel Jones was a 41.6. And the absolute worst player, though I am going to note someone, oh, actually, no, they did this a little bit out of order here. I apologize. Daniel Jones was the worst performing player in that game. Paris Campbell was the 4th worst at 43.8. And actually, John Michael Schmitz did come out pretty bad at 42.8. Though, again, when we move away from things like PFF and you do the old eye test, Glowinski was the worst thing existing on an NFL football field on Sunday. And that's saying a lot given the struggles of one Evan Neal. So it's up in the air with what's going to happen here with the offensive line. But I do then turn over, and you shared this in our pre-show. We're going to call it a meeting. Why not? The concern around the Arizona Cardinals, let's just tie this into the offensive line, is that against the Washington Commanders last week, that defensive unit for the Arizona Cardinals, they put up 7 pass deflections, 6 sacks, 6 tackles for a loss, 6 QB hits, 2 forced fumbles, an interception, and a touchdown. And we could sit here and talk about whether or not Sam Howell is going to be a good quarterback or otherwise. But if you tell me suspect offensive line play and a defense and a team that doesn't really have anything to play for or lose this season, that can breed a little bit of chaos in a game like this and an offensive line that's clearly struggling.
Oh, it's going to give the Giants fits. I mean, let's not pretend like the Washington Commander line is the best line in football. So we know that they have certain challenges of their own. But you pointed it out. The Cardinals are a tanking team. Someone forgot to tell that defensive side of the ball that they're tanking, right? They looked great. If they could have done anything on offense, if they could have put up a single touchdown on offense, they would have won that game. They would have beaten the Washington Commanders if they had any sort of consistent quarterback play and just offense in general being able to have sustained drives. And they played great. You know, you look at their rookie cornerback, Keitrell Clark, 6th round draft pick. He only allowed 23 yards on 4 targets in week 1. He looked really good against guys like Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin. Like, these are real NFL bona fide wide receivers, and he held up his end of the bargain. They look scrappy. They don't have that many names of players that you have would say are household names across the league. But there's just guys that come up with sacks and pressures and everything else in between, Adam. And, you know, an interesting example is Dennis Gardeck is a guy that had 4 tackles, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble for the Arizona Cardinals. This has got to be a huge concern. The Giants can't sit back and say, we can take a little bit of a breather in between Dallas and San Francisco. This Arizona Cardinals defense is actually really good.
Yeah, and when you go and you look over at the stats coming out of that game, Washington wins at 20-16. And inside the receiving room, you see Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, Dotson, McLaurin, obviously, and it's all peppered around there. Nobody more than 54 receiving yards, but 30 to 50. A lot of guys putting up some chunks of yardage throughout the game. 202 total passing yards for Sam Howell. But the thing that I came out of week 1 noticing too, beyond, you don't take away the weather, but just the way this team is constructed and what the idea is under Mike Kafka, you need the guys that you're reading when you look in the receiver room for the Washington Commanders. Speedy, shifty guys, right? Get out of their routes fast. The issue right now is Paris Campbell struggled in week 1. That's okay, but he represents that mold. We think that Wan'Dale Robinson, when healthy and on the field, represents that mold. Sterling Shepard, is there anything left? Jalen Hyatt as he develops. But Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton, they aren't those guys. And that was one of my other takeaways from week 1 is these aren't your win the individual matchups. These are the guys that you want to see trickle down in terms of the hierarchy of players that the defense keys in on. And then you afford them the ability to get some of the better matchups for routes to develop. If we're talking about a defense in Arizona that's going to be bringing pressure, I need more. I need more than just a Paris Campbell type player that's going to give us those opportunities, because even though Darren Waller graded out well and we think in the opportunities look good, he also needs time for the routes to develop. These are not the quick, shifty players that Mike Kafka's offense wants to be predicated on.
Yeah, and Adam, I mean, listen, nobody played well on offense. I want to make it very clear that we're not saying that Daniel Jones played well, but
No.
the idea is without time to throw for whatever quarterback is back there for the New York Giants, I feel like sometimes it gets lost when you do these little nuanced conversations. Adam, like, listen, we could have a Daniel Jones conversation later. He did not play well, fine. Any quarterback that's getting less than 2 seconds to throw and is getting pressured on 70% of their dropbacks, either sacked or pressured, is not allowing all of these routes to be able to develop, mature,
Yep.
getting players open. It doesn't allow Kafka and Dable to run their scheme and their game plan because you're limiting the route tree if he has to get the ball out that quickly. We can't go vertical. We can't have double moves. We can't have long corners or long daggers or long posts because it takes too long for it to develop. And so the Giants
Yep.
have to play better across the offensive line, or else none of these things in the route tree can open up. And that is hugely concerning because it really limits the amount of creativity that the offensive coaches can instill in the package that we're going to put up against the Cardinals.
I agree with you, man. It's less than ideal, I'll say, just in terms of not knowing, not having a sense of baseline of what this team can be. And if we turn our attention now over to the defensive side of the ball, and we talked about this coming out of week one, lackluster, you're going to be going up against a relatively no-name quarterback in Joshua Dobbs, 21 to 30 for 132. He came away with a 21.6 QBR against a talented defensive unit for Washington. You're not going to put him in the upper echelon, but they're certainly capable of doing some things. We know they have some real players up front there, even if I don't believe Chase Young was not in that initial game there to start the season. But I'm going to go ahead and pull up a couple of things here. I'm going to do this in a crude way this week. And then if you're over on YouTube, you'll see us refine this process a little bit. But there was a key sequence here. We talk about the 4th and 3 play. And this is 4th and 3 when it's 16-0 already Dallas. And right now, what you're seeing is where the distance is for the secondary in terms of closing speed. That's going to be Trey Hawkins that's about to lay some real wood. But then you bring it back. There's the open pocket for Dak Prescott, full protection. And on the top left of the screen, you can see number 3 for Dallas is the one that's going to be coming across for that opportunity. Now let's flip it one more time. Here he is looking like he has a ton of space. Whose assignment was it? Back it up one click. This is at the line of scrimmage. That is Adoree Jackson in the slot. He gets jammed at the line of scrimmage, gets bumped back about a half a yard off of it, and 2 steps later, that's all that this is. It is 2 frames later on all 22 film. He has created that space for himself. And on a 4th-down-and-3 play, when Dallas is choosing to go for it, to be like, hey, we're going to go ahead and put the nail in the coffin right now. Not only did the Giants struggle to get any pressure on Dak Prescott to disrupt the rhythm, you had the entirety of the secondary playing 5 to 7 yards off the line of scrimmage. I don't know good math well, Andy, but I know some simple stuff. You can't stop a guy from picking up 3 yards if you're not trying to tackle him before he's 5 or 6 yards down the field. Those are some of the little things with Wink that I need to see. And from the players ultimately on the field, you got to know down and distance. Listen, give up a 20-yard play before you give up a 4-yard play, right? Like, go and try to make that play aggressively rather than sit back on your heels a little bit and without pressure, allow Dak to dictate terms.
Well, and you mentioned Adoree Jackson being the defensive player involved there. Adam, he's our best, most accomplished cornerback. He's
Yeah.
going up against Brandon Cooks. You expect him to be able to win his matchups. We talked about it before. Prior to the Dallas game, it was going to be a challenge for guys like Isaiah Hodgins and Slayton to beat guys like Trayvon Diggs and Stephon Gilmore because they're expected to win those matchups. Adoree Jackson is expected to win his matchup, especially when he's in the slot. In a big moment like that, he has to know that that ball is going to come out relatively quick on 4th and short, knowing that you have to play the chains, knowing that that's where ultimately the play is going to go. Now,
Yeah.
ultimately, you showed a couple of different visuals where not only did Dak have a clean pocket, he cleaned vision into it too. There wasn't even any traffic in his way. He could see everything that was going on for Brandon Cooks. That also goes to that defensive front and the defensive pressure. While Dexter Lawrence had a few of them in the limited opportunities they had, they still need more. They need
Oh,
more
yeah.
pressure. You're going to have to see Leonard Williams wreak some havoc against the Cardinals in order to get that pressure against Joshua Dobbs. You're going to have to see Ojulari and Thibodeau in the backfield consistently. We can't just sit back and allow, as a perfect example, Dak Prescott to have all the time in the world to make an easy pitch and catch with Brandon Cooks. Those things cannot happen if they want to beat the Cardinals on Sunday.
100%. And I'm going to give just a couple of other examples here. And this was actually on the second Nate play in that same drive a few plays earlier where Dak, they're trying to convert and it's a dropped pass by the tight end. But again, I show this because if you go ahead and take a look at it, and I'll see when I get there, this was the handoff play that actually is the one example I want to show something positive. That's right, Adam, show something positive. This is the example where on 2nd and 8, you can look across the line. Ultimately, this gets broken down for no more than a 1-yard gain. And you can see in the middle of that line there, Dexter Lawrence is cracking down to what is going to be the weak side pressure there off the defensive end for, I can't remember who it is coming off that edge there, along with Kayvon Thibodeau, who's down on the line. You have Adoree Jackson, who, by the way, again, this was the other concern that we had on plays like these, that when Adoree Jackson comes down the field into the box, that he can get washed out very easily on these running plays. Now, the play goes off to the left, and it's a nice job by what we think is the bread and butter of this defensive front, clogging things up, occupying 3 or 4 offensive linemen on 2 or 3 defensive bodies, and then you're trusting the speed to come in and clean it up. And it was Isaiah Simmons who came wrapping around that end there, using his speed in that example to go ahead and wrap up the ball carrier. This is where you can have success. When you have an inexperienced quarterback like Dobbs on the field, shut down the run to start, and then force them into situations where that secondary can play aggressive, and hopefully Adoree Jackson can shut down the first option and make some easy pickings for Banks and for Hawkins.
Yeah, I think it was a good example of how they also want Isaiah Simmons to play on the field, Adam. So that was a good call out. Like, he's going to be getting around the corner. They say that his tackling is a little bit of a challenge, and that obviously he's better just utilizing his speed. Wink already showing you that even on a run play, he's going to try to get him in the backfield as quickly as possible, not just sit back in the secondary and play the linebacking position. He's going to be up at the line trying to make a tackle for a loss, make a big type of play. I expect to see more of that from Isaiah Simmons in terms of getting into the backfield and trying to break up plays rather than trying to tackle someone 9 yards down the field. It feels like that's going to be the sweet spot for some of these new players that Wink is trying to incorporate.
Yeah, 100%. And we just think about the Washington side of it to round things out. They had 3 sacks on the day, 11 tackles for a loss, 3 pass deflections as well to go along with 6 QB hits. That's the benchmark here. The Arizona Cardinals are not a great team. They're not a great offensive line. That is the benchmark for that defensive front first and foremost. Pressures, get in front of the QB there, and force some potential errors from them. What do you got next up here before we round ourselves out?
No, all I was just going to say is let's also keep in mind Joshua Dobbs got acquired a couple of weeks ago. Like, they saw what Colt McCoy was in practice, and they said, we cannot have this. Won't even be competitive with Colt McCoy. They go out and get Joshua Dobbs. Adam, he threw the ball 30 times and had 132 yards passing. It wasn't like they said, no, we're only going to throw the ball 12 times. Like, we're going to limit the amount of times he tosses it. He threw the ball 30 times. He had just over 4 yards per attempt, which is like not even existent in the NFL. That is as low as you can get. Baker Mayfield looked worse. He had 5 yards per attempt. So, like, when you think about contextually what they're asking Joshua Dobbs to do, everything is short gains. They are not looking to stretch the field vertically. And so because of that, this Giants defense needs to be prepared to try to get early pressure or make stops against Joshua Dobbs. Not necessarily worry too much about stuff over the top. There should be very few scenarios where Joshua Dobbs has enough time to throw a 40-yard pass down the field. Like, that should not even happen because like, one-on-one coverage, even with Tay Banks or Trey Hawkins, you got to feel pretty confident that Joshua Dobbs isn't going to beat you in that regard.
You say you can't get any worse than 4.4. Daniel Jones, 3.7 yards per pass last week against the Dallas Cowboys. But it is a point well taken. Exactly. And you saw the results on that. Hard. It takes a long time to get down the field if you're only moving at 40 yards a clip. So yeah, these are all things I think the Giants need to watch for here. When we come up on our Friday episode, we're going to talk fantasy. We're going to talk betting lines. We're going to do our helmet pulls and our game picks and also our key matchups inside of this. But from a high level, and the Giants, we'll give you a little sneak preview. I think they're up to now 5.5-point favorites in this game on the road in Arizona. Like, let's just be realistic here. Just clean it up, right? We said you put behind week 1 and you say, when you came out of the preseason, when you came out of training camp, you looked at the schedule and said, Arizona Cardinals, that's the game that we go win and really, really drum somebody up and make ourselves feel good. Do all of that. Wipe away the bad taste. The offensive line doesn't have to be perfect, but it just needs to be adequate, right? The receivers don't have to be breaking away for 50-yard bombs. They just need to be getting first downs. And likewise for Daniel Jones, with some time, he needs to find those plays, execute. And I do need to see this defense become a bit of an identity for the team, because that's what we thought was possible this year, and week 1 didn't show that.
At the end of the day, Adam,
Mm-hmm,
it's all
mm-hmm.
about getting a win and looking better than what it was on Sunday Night Football. I don't need it to be perfect. I don't.
No.
I don't care if it's a slugfest and you just go out and you find a way to win. What you and I were talking about a little bit off to the side too is the Giants are also in the fan base's no way to win situation. It's like
Mm-hmm.
if they beat the Cardinals and they look better, everyone's like, well, Arizona's trying to tank. You didn't really accomplish anything. You got to show me against the 49ers. If they lose, then it's like, see, I told you this team is never going to go anywhere. It's really a lose-lose situation, even if the Giants are going to win. I don't listen to any of that. I just want to be 1-1 come Sunday. And this offensive line needs to be marginally better. They need to protect Daniel Jones better. Daniel Jones needs to play better. And this defense needs to be the reason why we win this game. They need to dictate everything that the offense does for the Arizona Cardinals. For me, Adam, just get better, though, right?
Yep. That's all you want to see. And a good reminder here, tight end room. That's what I'm going to be talking about when we get onto our Friday show and talk about key matchups where the Giants can win from a skill set standpoint. And also, just to cap off our poll question that we were asking, and we'll remind everybody the results on Friday as well. But we wanted to know how the fan base felt when we talked about where this team is and what the offseason meant. Over on the YouTube community, get over there. We're running polls all throughout the season. Steady next step. 67% of fans, steady next step is what they thought this season was going to be for the Giants. A steady next step is going to Arizona and handling your business against the Cardinals. We'll break this thing down into a fine powder come Friday. Until then, though, you get over to YouTube, you turn on your alerts so you know when we're going live and posting all of our episodes on your podcast feeds. Over on Twitter, at Adam Armbrecht, at AndyMac214, and at One Giant Podcast. Until next time, until the best times, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.